There's a photo from a recent Roloff family gathering, smiling faces, the Oregon farm in the background, the kind of image that makes you think nothing ever changes in this family. But if you look closely, and I mean really look, you start to notice who isn't there. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because the people missing from that photo aren't strangers to the Roloff name. They're family. And the reason they're not standing in that frame has everything to do with a brand, a belief system, and a slow, quiet fracture that's been building for years right in front of our eyes. Jeremy and Audrey Roloff didn't just leave Little People Big World. They left it to build something bigger, something more curated, something that, on the surface, looks like the perfect Christian family life, but underneath tells a much more complicated story about what happens when your brand becomes your identity, and your identity starts pushing your own family away. This is the story of an empire built on love, faith, and togetherness, while the family it was supposed to represent quietly stopped showing up. If this is the kind of deep dive content you've been looking for, hit that like button right now and subscribe to LPBW Update, because we don't just cover the headlines here, we go behind them. Now let's get into it. To understand where Jeremy and Audrey are today, you have to go back to the beginning, back to when they were the golden couple of Little People Big World. And I mean golden in every sense of the word. Jeremy Roloff was the eldest son, the one who grew up on camera, the one the audience watched go from a kid riding four-wheelers on the farm to a young man falling in love on screen. And Audrey came in like a finishing piece to a puzzle the audience didn't even know was incomplete. Their relationship had everything reality television loves: chemistry, conviction, the kind of faith-forward romance that felt like a throwback to something simpler. Their wedding on the Roloff farm was one of those episodes that people still talk about. It wasn't just a wedding, it was an event. The farm looked extraordinary, the vows were heartfelt, and the audience, millions of them, felt like they were watching something real in a genre that rarely delivers real. That's an important word, real, because it's the word that's going to keep coming up as we move through this story. Jeremy and Audrey were real, or at least they felt real. And in the world of reality television, feeling real is the whole game. Viewers invested in them, they rooted for them, they bought into the idea that these two people had something that most people spend their whole lives looking for. And the couple knew it. They felt the weight of that audience belief, and rather than stepping back from it, they leaned all the way in. Before they even left the show, the brand had already started. A book called Beating 50%, a marriage guidebook built around their relationship and their faith. They were essentially saying, we have something you can learn from. Our marriage is a model. And a significant portion of the audience agreed because the book sold. People bought it, people read it, people shared it. And that early success told Jeremy and Audrey something important, that there was a market for what they were offering, and that market extended far beyond the TLC viewership. When Jeremy announced he was leaving Little People Big World, he framed it in the language of authenticity. He talked about not wanting to perform family life for a camera, about wanting to live more intentionally, more privately, more in line with his values. It was a statement that, at the time, a lot of people respected, because there's something admirable about someone in the spotlight choosing to walk away from it on their own terms. But here's where it gets interesting, and I want you to hold this thought because we're going to come back to it. Jeremy and Audrey didn't walk away from the performance. They just changed the stage. After leaving LPBW, they built what can only be described as a full lifestyle empire. The Always More podcast, where they discuss faith, marriage, and intentional living. Homesteading content across multiple platforms, showing their life on their property in a way that's visually stunning and deeply curated. Christian marriage retreats where couples pay to attend and learn from Jeremy and Audrey directly. Online courses, speaking engagements, a brand presence that, if you map it out, is actually more expansive than what they had on the show. Think about that for a second. They left television because they didn't want to perform, and then they built a multi-platform content operation that requires constant content creation, audience management, and personal branding. The performance didn't stop. It just moved to Instagram, to podcasts, to retreat centers in Oregon. And the audience for this new performance is, in some ways, more devoted than a reality TV audience, because this audience came specifically for the values. They're not casual viewers, they're believers, and that changes the dynamic entirely. Now we need to talk about the actual content of their brand, because this is where the story gets genuinely complicated. And I want to be precise here, because this isn't about attacking anyone's faith. Jeremy and Audrey's brand is explicitly rooted in traditional Christianity, traditional marriage structure, defined gender roles, faith-led parenting. The idea that a family built on biblical principles is a family that thrives. These aren't hidden beliefs, they're the product. When you buy the book, download the podcast, or attend the retreat, you are purchasing access to a worldview, and that worldview has a very specific shape. For a large segment of the audience, that worldview is exactly what they're looking for. And I'm not here to tell those people they're wrong for finding value in it. But here's what's undeniable. That worldview, when it becomes the foundation of an entire brand, creates a gravitational pull. It attracts people who share it, and it creates distance, sometimes significant distance, with people who don't. And some of those people are Roloffs. Jacob Roloff is the youngest son, and if Jeremy represents one end of the Roloff ideological spectrum, Jacob is standing at the complete opposite end. Jacob has been public, remarkably public actually, about his departure from organized religion. He's talked about growing up in an environment where faith was intertwined with performance, where the cameras shaped the behavior, where the version of family that appeared on screen and the version that existed behind it were sometimes very different things. He wrote a book. He's given interviews. He's posted on social media with a transparency that is almost jarring compared to the rest of his family. Jacob and his wife Isabel are vocal about progressive values, about skepticism toward institutional religion, about the ways that traditional structures can sometimes do harm rather than good. They are not quiet about this. And neither is their lifestyle content, which sits in sharp contrast to Jeremy and Audrey's. These two couples could not be further apart in their public worldviews, and they share a last name. They grew up in the same house. They sat at the same dinner table. And now? The dinner table, metaphorically and maybe literally, has become almost impossible to share. The interesting thing is that neither side has gone on record for a direct public confrontation. There's no explosive interview where Jacob calls out Jeremy by name, or where Audrey responds to Isabel's social posts. The divide exists in the spaces, in who gets tagged in family milestones, in who shows up at events, in the absence of the usual sibling dynamic you'd expect to see on social media from two people who grew up this close. Social media archaeology, and I genuinely love this term, is the practice of reading what isn't said as carefully as what is. And when you do that with the Roloff family, the picture gets very clear very fast. Let's build the map because this is where it gets fascinating. Matt and Amy Roloff, despite their divorce, have remained central figures in the family's public life. They co-parent, they show up at events, they're both still connected to the farm in different ways. That's one layer. Then you have Zach and Tori, who remained on the show and who have their own following, their own platform, and their own relationship with the Roloff name. They're still in the circle, still visible, still tagging and being tagged. Jeremy and Audrey exist in a parallel orbit. They interact with certain family members. They show up for certain occasions. But look at the pattern over time. The events they attend, the ones they don't, the family moments where their absence is notable. And then look at Jacob and Isabel's orbit. Separate, distinct, almost operating as if the family in question is a different family entirely. The moments where these worlds collide are rare, and when they do, there's a careful choreography to it, a deliberate distance maintained even in shared spaces. People who've watched this family for 15+ years notice these things. They've been trained to read the Roloffs, and what they're reading right now tells a story that no one on screen is willing to tell out loud. Here's the question I want to ask, and I want to ask it seriously, not rhetorically. When your entire business is built on the authenticity of your family life, what do you do when your family fractures? This isn't a gotcha question. It's a genuinely hard problem. Jeremy and Audrey's brand only works if the family it's built on appears solid. The marriage retreats, the podcast, the guidebook, all of it is built on the premise that their model works, that their approach to faith and family produces something worth replicating. But what happens to that premise when the broader family around them is visibly fragmented? When the siblings don't show up? When the next generation of Roloffs is charting wildly different courses? Do you address it? Or do you keep posting about morning devotionals and farm life and let the audience fill in the blanks? Jeremy and Audrey have chosen, and this is a choice, make no mistake, to keep the focus tight. The content stays in their lane, their marriage, their children, their homestead. The world outside that frame, including the complicated world of the Roloff family dynamics, doesn't really appear in their content. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's healthy. Maybe drawing a boundary around what you share publicly is exactly the right call. But here's the tension. Their whole brand is built on openness, on vulnerability, on inviting people into the real story of their marriage and their faith journey. When that openness has such carefully defined edges, when the messy parts of the family narrative are consistently outside the frame, it raises a question about what real actually means in this context. I want to zoom out for a moment because this story isn't unique to the Roloffs. It's actually part of a documented pattern that's worth understanding. The reality TV to Christian lifestyle brand pipeline is real. You can trace it through multiple families and multiple shows. The Duggars, obviously, are the most extreme example, a family whose entire brand was built on faith and traditional values, and whose eventual implosion was as public and as devastating as their rise had been. The Bateses followed a similar arc. Smaller examples exist across the reality television landscape. Cast members who, after their show runs its course or they choose to leave, pivot to faith-based content, marriage content, parenting content, homesteading content. The formula has a logic to it. Reality TV builds you an audience. That audience knows your face, trusts your story, feels connected to you. When you transition to independent content creation, you can take a significant portion of that audience with you, particularly if you offer them something they're already looking for. And for a large, underserved segment of the American audience, explicitly Christian lifestyle content is exactly what they want. It's a real market, a loyal one, and it rewards consistency in a way that reality TV rarely does. But the formula also carries risk, because the more you build your brand on the authenticity of your real life, the more vulnerable you become when that real life gets complicated. The Duggars didn't survive their complications. The question is whether softer versions of the same tension, like what we're watching with Jeremy and Audrey, are manageable, or whether they eventually crack under their own weight. Jeremy and Audrey are smarter operators than most. They've kept their brand clean. They've avoided the kinds of public controversies that sink other influencers. They've maintained a consistent aesthetic and a consistent message. But the fractures within the broader Roloff family are not going away. And at some point, the gap between what their brand says and what their family shows may become too wide to paper over with a podcast episode. There's a philosophical question underneath all of this that I think deserves some real attention. Can you build a genuine brand about family while the family around you is breaking apart? I'm not saying Jeremy and Audrey's family is broken. I want to be clear about that. Their marriage appears, by all publicly available evidence, to be solid. Their children are healthy and seemingly thriving. The homestead is real. The faith is real, in the sense that it's clearly a genuine part of who they are, rather than a performance put on for commercial gain. But family isn't just your spouse and your children. Family is the people who shaped you, the people who sat across from you at Thanksgiving, the brothers you grew up with, the parents who put their lives on camera so you could have an audience before you were old enough to understand what an audience was. And some of those people, increasingly clearly, are not in Jeremy and Audrey's world in the way that their brand might suggest. When your content is about family and the family is quietly fracturing, what are you actually selling? A blueprint for something you've built or a vision of something you've idealized? And is there a meaningful difference between the two? These are questions your audience will sit with because many of them have been there. Many of them have sat in family gatherings that felt more like performances than connections. Many of them have watched relatives post about family togetherness while the real relationships quietly dried up. The Roloffs are not unique in this. They're just visible in a way that most families aren't. Now, I want to be fair, and this matters, because content like this can tip into takedown territory if you're not careful, and that's not what this is. Jeremy and Audrey, by their own metrics, may be living exactly the life they want to live. They have a marriage they're proud of, they have children they adore, they have a community of like-minded people who find genuine value in what they share. They have a homestead that represents a set of values they actually hold. By almost every measure they would use to define success, they are succeeding. The faith they practice isn't a costume. The marriage they model isn't a fiction. Their belief that what they're doing matters for their family, for their audience, for their community is probably genuinely felt. So the question isn't whether they're happy. They probably are. The question is whether the happiness they've built has required a kind of selective distance from parts of their family and their history. Whether the life they've constructed demands a certain narrowness, a careful curation of who's in the circle and who, over time, has drifted to the outside of it. And whether, in the quiet moments away from the camera and the podcast mic and the retreat center, Jeremy Roloff ever thinks about his youngest brother, about the distance between them, about whether that distance is the price of the life they've built, or whether it's something that could still be bridged. We'll never know the answer to that, because some things, even in the most public families, stay private. And maybe that's as it should be. But here's what we do know. Jeremy and Audrey Roloff left little people, big world to live more authentically. Those were Jeremy's words, more authentically. And in some ways, they've absolutely delivered on that promise. The homestead is real. The faith is real. The marriage, as far as we can see, is real. But they also built a brand that requires constant performance, constant content, constant presence, constant projection of a specific image into the world. And the image they project, intentional family, faith-led living, togetherness as a practice, exists in a complicated relationship with the reality of a family that, from the outside, looks increasingly divided. That's not a condemnation, it's an observation. And it's an observation that their audience, the ones who have followed them from TLC to Instagram to podcast platforms to retreat centers, deserves to sit with. Because the line between authentic and performed, especially in the world of lifestyle content, is genuinely thin. It's thinner than most creators want to admit. And when the content is explicitly about family, and the family isn't entirely in the frame, that line gets thinner still. Jeremy and Audrey aren't unique in walking that line, but they may be the most visible example of what happens when you try to turn your family into a brand, your faith into a product, and your life into a lesson. While life itself keeps moving in directions no brand strategy can fully account for. That's the story. That's what's happening. And whether you're a fan of Jeremy and Audrey, a skeptic, or someone who just finds the whole Roloff universe endlessly fascinating, you have to admit that it's a story worth paying attention to. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you follow Jeremy and Audrey's content? And when you watch it, does it feel like the real them? Or does it feel like version 2.0? A polished post-reality TV upgrade of the couple we first met on the farm? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this community has some of the sharpest takes I've ever seen, and I genuinely want to hear where you land on this one. And if you're not subscribed to LPBW Update yet, what are we doing here? This is exactly the kind of content we live for. Not gossip, not takedowns, real analysis of a family that has been performing its own story for over 15 years, and what that performance reveals when you look closely enough. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay with us, because next we're going deeper into the fractures of this family, and the story only gets more layered from here.